Look! Look, the dynamic duo!
I wanted to go on a rant on the Superman situation. You know, the more you watch Fantastic Four, the more you love Fantastic Four. The more I watch Superman, the more I absolutely hate that movie. And the more I'm upset with James Gunn for just ruining a character. It's unforgivable to me what they did. And here's what I realized, Kevin. Let me tell you something. And in order to understand things, you have to first understand yourself and recognize your own flaws. So let me tell you about my flaws. My flaw is that my perception of DC Comics, right? As a guy who's read comics his whole entire life, as young as I could remember, all the way to today, my perception of DC Comics is that pre-Crisis on Infinite Earth, DC Comics was this childish, infantile, immature, unsophisticated publishing company. I thought that the DC Comics were the equivalent of the Super Friends, and the Super Friends was beneath my intelligence. It was the difference between Thunder the Barbarian and He-Man. And He-Man was silly, childish. Even as a kid, I was like, I'm not interested in that because we have a talking tiger that's too silly. But Thunder was a whole other level. And so that was my perception of DC comic books. And the question becomes, am I right? Was that perception correct? Are DC comics inferior? Are they less sophisticated? And the answer is not necessarily. And it certainly is, I don't know. So I've just recently learned, for example, that Steve Englehart was writing for DC and writing Batman stories. I didn't know that. So how could I be a judge of something that I don't know anything about? And my perception was based on prejudice. What's interesting about prejudice, Kevin, is that there's there's data that backs prejudice up. So as a kid, if you picked up the average Superman comic book randomly, you would see Superman doing something like pulling the moon, and my young intellectual brain would be, "This is stupid," and I would put it down. Then I would turn on the television, I would see Super Friends, and I would see the activate powers, twin powers activated with the talking dog a la Scooby Doo, and it confirmed my prejudice, but it didn't make my prejudice factual because at the same time this was happening, some very real dramatic stuff was happening in the DC universe comic books. So the fact of the matter is I'm wrong, but it's so infused in me that even knowing that I'm wrong, that perception still is within me. I still perceive DC as pre-crisis DC as inferior to pre-crisis to the Marvel comic books, and that's what I've come to realize. What I've come to realize is that the perception of the average comic book fan or superhero fan or superhero movie fan is that we think of comic books, the Marvel era, as infantile, stupid, childish stuff that we love because as much as I think Superman, the pre-crisis DC is inferior, I still love it. I mean, I still have a connection to it because they're superheroes. So people think, oh, this is really stupid and childish, but we love it. I mean, I'm connected to I play with my toys. You know what I mean? And so it is that perception that brings them to the realization that we need to change. We can't do it as is. We have to, make it more intellectual and so on and so forth. But that's the perception of both a lot of the fans and of the producers, whether it's the comic book writers today or the movie producers and directors and writers today. That seems to be the consensus. The question now I'm asking, and by the way, that consensus is backed by data, right? When they look back, they could look at a comic book and go, oh my God, this looks really silly. This is childish. The question that we have to ask ourselves is it true? And I'm trying to tell you, and this is one of those cognitive dissonance situations that no matter what I say, it's not going to change people's opinions as much as my opinion of the DC thing is not really changing. what what Stan Lee did, and I'm not going to talk of DC because I don't know DC. I didn't read DC. But what Stan Lee did was something brilliant and specific. Right now, Kevin, the perception is comic books are children for children. The silver age of comic books is for children. It's infantile. So let's make it adult, right? So it's broken down into children and adult, right? Uh, and that's the wrong perception. What Stan Lee did, what he was able to do, was to offer a material that appeals to both children and adults. It is sophisticated enough for an adult to appreciate it, but exciting and thrilling enough for a child to love it. That's what he did. It's the melding of the two that makes it successful. And what we're doing is that it seems to be like we're separating the two. Either the movie is too silly and too childish and too ridiculous, a la Superman, or it's too serious and too heavy and too hard, a la, let's say, even a movie that I love, a la The Joker, or The Dark Knight. That's not where the truth lies in this material, in this genre. The truth lies somewhere in between. And the truth, Kevin, is that when you look at the old comic books, the Civil Age comic books, the original Fantastic Four, Kirby, John Buscema, George Perez, those guys, there was no silliness. This was pure, unadulterated drama that as an adult you could look at and say, oh my God, this is not as silly as I remembered it to be. And if we can tap into that seriousness and that drama, that's what would lead for the movies to be successful. And it is the divorcing of that genre that's, I think, hurting our industry as much as it is. I don't know if that made any sense.
It did. Um, I agree with a lot of what you said. I also think that a lot of it has to do with the creators of today based on the past. Because TV and radio and everything back then was more fantasy based, in my opinion, than some of it is now, and that makes somewhat of a difference.
But I think part of that reason is because of the so-called maturization. Like the technological aspect of the MCU. Everything is technology, 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 rather than fantasy, fantasy, fantasy. We need to have armor. We need to have an explanation as to why a character flies. Going away from fantasy, that's because of the perception of, oh no, we need to make this make sense. We need to be adult about this. It's silly to be just running around in a costume and capes. Like that's not realistic. Let's take a genre that we love and let's make it make sense. And my argument is that it made sense before. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to fix it. That's my argument.
Agree.
And of course there were bad comic books. There were bad stories. There were silly stories, but those are not the stories that we cite. Those are not the stories that the fan reacted to when they came out. So let's not emulate bad stuff. I'm saying let's emulate the good stuff, and we'd,
Agreed.
and we'd be good. And we'd be good. Anyway, people, listen. I hope that you will forgive our long hiatus, and I hope you'll welcome us back. And Kevin, it's a pleasure to see you again, man. And welcome back to the show.
Always, my brother. And as I said, ladies and gentlemen, we are back on the planet and back on the job.